Hello, everybody. So, good news. Rearing Rambles is back. Now, we're going to make it a little bit different, a little bit better. Rearing Rambles is going to be a little bit reformatted now. There's going to be a separate podcast now for plants. It will be called Tissue Talks, and we will be starting that up soon as well. But Rearing Rambles is going to kind of expand a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to have episodes that are dedicated to a species, of course, and there's going to be a lot more emphasis on natural history and care and things like that, as well as my personal experience with the rearing of them. I feel like that is kind of the best way to engage people with the species. So we are going to kind of reformat just a little. Um, so today's species is going to be a really cool roach known as Deropeltis paulinoi, the orange velvet roach. Now, these guys are a species of cockroach from Africa, and they are fairly specialized in their habits. Now, for people who aren't ecologically based, specialists are organisms that will usually do one thing, and you can be like a microclimate specialist or microhabitat specialist, if you will. You could be a dietary specialist, you could be a seasonal specialist, you can be specialized in a wide range of different things. It's not just diet. Now, one of the things that comes up a lot in rearing is some species are very habitat generalist, and those species tend to be a lot easier to accommodate and thus rear. So, species that have a quite wide range and that have been found in a number of different habitat types or biomes, such as Actias luna. Luna moths are found across the majority of the United States, Canada, and parts of Mexico. And there are plenty of subpopulations that have different adaptations to different areas because the climate a Luna moth will encounter in Maine is not going to be the same climate that a Luna moth will encounter in Florida. And in some cases, Lunas from Florida may be more specialized to certain host plants and unable to process some of the host plants that maybe a northern Luna population can, but we're not talking about Lunas. Dear-O-Peltis paulinoi is a roach that is specialized to breaking down rotting plant material, mostly rotting wood and leaf litter, to the point where they just don't eat very much else. They are also kind of habitat specialists coming from scrubland areas in Africa where there is a regular dry season and a regular wet season. Their life cycle kind of goes a little like this. In the spring, or at the beginning of the wet season, if you will, the oothecae, the egg cases that have been in the leaf litter, in the soil, what have you, begin to hatch. These nymphs then crawl around in small groups, feeding on leaf litter and rotting wood, rotting fruit sometimes, things like that. They're not a very protein driven cockroach, but we'll get into that later. Um, but they will eat and grow by molting because they're insects, and eventually, after a couple of short months, they become mature adults. The females are wingless. They're kind of short and squat, whereas the males are these very long, skinny, jet black winged creatures that look like a totally different species than the females. And these guys are fairly short-lived as adults. They don't eat very much in the adult stage. They mate. The females live about 4 months, laying copious numbers of egg cases before dying. Um, and then the cycle repeats when the rains return. It's a really interesting cockroach species. Now, I read on one sec. I think it was Kyle of Roach Crossing who had an observation that when he fed a Deropeltis paulinoi to a fireblight toad, the fireblight toad regurgitated the roach because of some defensive chemical in the roach. Now, the reason that I bring this up is a little bit of a tangent. So, I killed off my Gnophoetocinaria colony. Gnophoetocinaria is the lobster roach, and as much as I loved the lobster roaches, they were causing me quite a few problems. Mainly, lobster roaches are very social, fairly smart for roaches, but they're also very vicious and aggressive. They love to eat other roaches, especially. And this causes a lot of problems because the lobster roaches would leave their bin and start little mini subcolonies in all my other roach colonies, and even in some of my isopod colonies. And I've actually lost quite a few things because the lobster roaches went in there, ate every other animal in the bin before starting to reproduce, okay? These sorts of things happen, and they can happen very quickly. Um, Remember that a lot of the animals I keep don't necessarily need to be fed more than once a week. And so there may be, some roach colonies that I'm not checking on more than once a week because they're not fed more than once a week. And so in a week's time frame, you could have a colony where it's one species and all of a sudden, a dozen or so lobster roaches find their way in there, and then by the end of the week, it's nothing but lobster roaches. It's really annoying. But the lobster roaches would enter the Dear-O-Peltis paulinoi container and not bother the paulinoi at all. They don't like eat the paulinoi for some reason. And I'm not complaining about it because Deropeltis paulinoi are not easy to come by. I've had my colony for many, many generations. Right now, it's in a container like this just because I just moved back to Connecticut in case people didn't know. And it's in a, I just had my bin with the, partially grown nymphs. I just had a big hatch out of the paulinoi. And so I have like half grown nymphs now, and I just plucked all the half-grown paulinoi nymphs out of the bin and composted the rest of the substrate because it was just overloaded with lobster roaches, and it was whatever. But I need to oh, hi Riley, hi girl, hi, thank you. I know. What do you have to say to everybody, Rye? Yeah, hi dog. I love my dog. Dog. Yes, I love you very much. You're a very sweet dog. Okay, so yeah, I need to redo my Illinois bin, and so I'm gathering the substrate materials. Um, so if anybody's audio only, my golden doodle is being very affectionate right now. Yes, hello. Okay. Um, Deropeltis paulinoi will Riley. You know, so I use Are you good? There. That's better. You can learn how to rear the Deropeltis as well, Riley. Yeah, hi. Um, so Deropeltis, as well as most of my other roach species, I keep in a substrate. I call it my just standard detritivore substrate. It's 1 part coconut coir, 1 part kinshi, which we're gonna get into, and 1 part leaf litter. Okay. Um, so coconut coir. I go at it with people about coconut coir, and here's why. Coconut coir is a chemically inert material made from the coconut industry. So basically, coconut doesn't grow on a tree because it's a monocot, but coconut plants grow very large and they produce coconuts. And then when the coconuts are harvested, the husk material, like the outer casing around the like fruit itself, is peeled away. And then it's just kind of decomposed a little bit. And then that material is sold as like an agricultural product because it's a good soil additive for a number of reasons. It has a good ion exchange, so it can help regulate nutrients in the soil. It's chemically inert, so it's not going to like mess around with too much in the substrate. Um, and that's going to become important in just a moment because it acts as a buffer. Now, for those of you who don't know a lot about chemistry, a buffer is a chemical that basically reacts with acids and bases equally. Okay? So, how do I explain it? Some chemicals will only react with acids. And whether a chemical is an acid or a base is whether it has a free hydronium ion or hydroxide ion. So if something is acidic, it can give a proton and accept an electron from an ion, whereas if something is basic, it gives a proton or something. Basic things take protons, acidic things give protons. And what that means is that some chemicals are only capable of accepting a proton, whereas some chemicals are only capable of giving one. But buffers can do both, and because of that, buffers are very important in biological systems because metabolic processes release a lot of acids, okay? And acids can build up and cause a lot of problems. So, one of the reasons acid is a problem is because a lot of enzymes and chemicals necessary for life require a certain pH to function optimally. If the pH is too high or if the pH is too low, the fact of the matter is those enzymes and other chemicals won't work as well, if at all. And that can be life threatening. So if you have like a heart attack, what happens is they test your blood pH. And the reason for that is because normal healthy heart muscle is able to get rid of carbon dioxide as it produces it. And then that carbon dioxide would normally be, exuded out of your body. But if you have a heart attack, you have a lot of dead tissue now, and all of that extra metabolism from the dead tissue breaking down, which is what's happening, is going to elevate your blood CO2 level. And when you have an elevated blood CO2 level, your blood pH drops. You have more acidic blood, which can actually be very harmful long term. So generally, if you have had a heart attack, they remedy the fact that your blood pH has gone down by injecting you with chemicals that will bring your blood pH back to normal. But point being, the more metabolic activity, the more acidic something becomes. You don't necessarily want that in a container that has live roaches, okay? So coconut coir is an essential additive. Even though it's not going to provide anything nutritionally for your cockroaches and isopods. I agree with that. But not everything is adapted to living inside of its food. What I mean by that is, um, isopods in the wild, roaches in the wild, have the option of getting away from just this acidic mess of rotting material when they need to. In captivity, they don't have that option. So you need a buffer in your substrate for your animals. If you don't have a buffer, you're going to have problems. And I've learned this from experience by just mixing just mixing kinshi and leaf litter. What happens after about a week and a half is everything breaks down into this soup. It's like a yellowy soup that just continually builds up, and everything in there dies because it's just a whole bunch of metabolic byproducts that are highly toxic. You put coir in that, you have a nice buffer, okay? And by doing that, you make your soil more stable for the animals that are using it. That's why I put coconut coir in my substrate. So my detritivore mix is 1 part leaf litter, okay? I compress it a little as I add it, but I'm not too anal about it being like exactly 1 part of everything. It doesn't have to be that precise. It's not tissue culture medium or anything. You can deviate a little bit, okay? 1 part kinshi, and we're gonna talk about kinshi in a minute, and 1 part coir, okay? Now generally a good practice is to always rinse your coir. So you might do that and it will help. What is kinshi and how do you get it? So kinshi is basically just oyster mushroom mycelium that has broken down sawdust and other materials. It's a wood base. These animals like to eat rotted wood. They don't like to eat fresh dead wood. They like to eat wood that has had fungi begin the process of breaking them down. So you have a couple options for getting rotting wood. One, you can go out in the woods if you live in a place where there's woods, which I now do again. I was in Colorado for 2.5 years. Now I'm back in Connecticut. But anyway, you go out and you can collect some rotting logs. Now, the caveat there is you want to make sure that it's not softwood. Softwood is just gymnosperm wood. So, like cedar and hemlock and pine and spruce, things like that's no good. You don't want that. Now, luckily, softwood generally is this really weird, like reddish brown color. Not a lot of hardwood is this weird reddish brown color. Some maple sometimes gets a little bit more like reddish brown, like almost like leather color, but most hardwood is going to be more like a whitish or like a lighter khaki brown. It's not going to be a weird sort of just unsettling brown, okay? And, similarly, things like birches are really ideal because the outer, like, bark doesn't rot nearly as quickly as the inner wood. So you can tell by, if you know what birch bark looks like, if you see a birch log, and the only other thing it could be if it looks like that is like poplar, but that's fine because poplar is also a hardwood, right? And so if you find like birch logs that like the inside is all like spongy texture, but the outside rind is still intact, that's usually pretty good to use. But you can also make your own rotting wood by either doing flake soil or kinshi. Now, I prefer kinshi over flake soil mostly because the kinshi is just a lot quicker to make. It takes about half the time, okay? There are some disadvantages to kinshi. One of the disadvantages to kinshi is that kinshi can kind of spring back to life, if you will, if the mushroom mycelium isn't like dead. It will aggressively like consume all the other organic material in your container, which is a problem. So kinshi, you can either make it with like a cold, tender pink oyster mushroom and then stifle it in the freezer, or you can have like really old dried up kinshi that's been fruited out several times. What I generally, the way I source my kinshi is I literally find a mushroom grower in my area and I call them up or I go on their website, and most of them, for maybe a few dollars, if not totally free, will give you their spent, fruited out mushroom blocks. So I just go and I say, I'm looking for, something that an oyster mushroom was used in, and, they point me in the right direction, and I just fill a couple of buckets with, like, just the old dead mushroom substrate, and that's what I use, and it works really, really well. Um, Flake soil involves using yeast to ferment some, what's it called? Like grilling pellets, which you can also do, but I prefer to use kinshi. So I take the kinshi, I take the leaf litter, and I take the core. It's, all kind of moist, and I just mix it all up. And that is my detritivore mix. Most of my roaches and all of my isopods live on the stuff. Um, I have a couple of roach species that just don't need very much in the way of substrate, so they don't get that. They just get a little bit of core, but most of my roaches are on detritivore substrate. And you do have to replace it periodically. What I generally do, if I can't collect all the roaches outright, is I will go ahead and like set some egg crate on top of the substrate and flood it so that the roaches climb up into the egg crate, and then I can dump out the dead substrate, replace it with fresh substrate, um, and just go from there. So that's what the Deropeltis paulinoi live in, is detritivore substrate. Several inches of it. They are in a bin that's got about 8 inches of the substrate. And the substrate is never fully wet. Okay? The substrate does fully dry out, but it's never like soaked. I do add water to it when there are nymphs in there developing. And as the nymphs start to get older, I start to water them a little less frequently, and I start to, just allow them to mature, and then they will just, do their thing. So it takes them roughly 3 months at 90 Fahrenheit to mature. Okay? So they're at 90 Fahrenheit in slightly moist substrate. Every week I add little bits of produce that they don't eat very much aside from the leaf litter and the rotting wood, okay? They just don't. They don't need very much protein. They don't really touch the dog food very much at all. They don't even really eat their dead like most of the other roach species I work with do. Um, they're just not protein fiends, it seems, which is fine. That's whatever. Um, but I give them discrete amounts of dog food every so often just to be safe. They don't generally eat it, but it is what it is. It's also good to just kind of feed some of the commensals that might be in there. Um, and I don't ever like witness mating or anything, but the females are always just laying eggs. They're always sticking the egg cases to like the sides of to like leaf litter and wood and whatnot. Um, and the adults live a couple of months. Males live about 2 months, females live about 4 months, and then the substrate I just kind of let sit dry, bone dry, for several weeks, about 6 weeks. Okay. Then I'll start to see nymphs, and then I'll just kind of give it a good watering again. And after another week, there's just nymphs all over the place in the bin, in the colony. And that's, just kind of how I cycle through them. So, yeah. Um, that's Dear-O-Peltis paulinoi for everybody.